Hi, this is a Paul Ribbons podcast, and it's a big rant today because I'm a bit sick and tired of people having a go at my country. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, I see a lot of stuff online with people banging on about how Britain's broken, we've got all these problems, it's a terrible place to live, and I'm looking it round and I'm thinking, are they talking about the same place that I am? Are they really talking about the country that I live in? Because it certainly doesn't appear that way. You know, it's not perfect by no stretch of imagination, but it's my country. I live here, and when I say I live here, I mean I've never had a problem with UK. Yeah, so you know we've got a financial system that's had a problem in the past, but it wasn't our problem, it was the world's problem, i.e. there was a money issue back in 2008. There's not a financial problem at the moment. Yes, we are seeing government wasting money, but that's always gone on, and there needs to be some accountability. I get that, I understand that, but you would have thought that all this money's being wasted on corruption by the way people are talking, that all our politicians are corrupt, when I don't think that's the case. I mean, it wasn't that long ago where politicians probably got away with a lot more in the past than they would today, because everything is instant today. I.e., someone can take a photograph of someone snogging in the corridor and it be on the net the next minute. So politicians can't get away with what they used to be able to get away with. And I think that not all politicians go into politics for reasons of feathering their pockets. I think there's a public duty, a service that they go into. I mean, take the Prime Minister, for example, right? He doesn't need to be Prime Minister. He doesn't need to work. But why does he do it? To line his own pockets? No, I don't think that's the case. I think he's there because he wants to serve the public. I think he had an ambition to be potentially Prime Minister one day, which he's probably achieved because obviously he's Prime Minister, right? But we don't know what his goals were. But he's there. He's our Prime Minister. And we should be proud of that fact as well. He might be a little bit, out of touch with the average person on the street, but most politicians are, because they come from a different background to us. So I find that we live in a place where everyone is scrutinised so much, because if you think about it, 20 years ago, the internet it was only in infancy. It wasn't the same as it is today. Everything is broadcast in a second today. Something happens and we've got an issue. Everyone's aware of it. And years gone by, it was different. And I was talking to someone the other day. It's not safe to walk the streets. I'm telling you now, it's far safer today than it was back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And the reason being is because everyone's got a camera on them. You can something happens and it's on the internet immediately. So people can't get away with what they used to get away with before. You only have to look back to the scandals of what went on in the 70s and the 80s. It was horrendous times, really, compared to today. It's a lot safer. I know people get abused and that does happen, but it happened a lot more in the past. It's a lot easier to raise the alarm and the flag nowadays than it was back 30, 40 years ago. There are some issues that need addressing. Yes, I get that. And I think we've got a generational thing going on now where they're far better off. These generations are far better off than our counterparts were many years ago. And I hear people saying, yeah, but generation baby boomers and Generation X, and they had more opportunities to buy a house, or the standard of living today is far greater than it was back in the 70s and 80s and the 90s. Far greater. We look after people in the system far better than we used to many years ago. I remember being unemployed and it was an absolute nightmare. It was, honestly, being unemployed in the 1970s, early 80s was it was embarrassing in a way. It was so difficult to make a claim and to get some sort of benefit. It was more aggravation. And I think I was unemployed for 2 weeks. I was homeless once and trying to get somewhere to rent in them days was really, really difficult. It's a lot easier today. So things are better in many respects, but in some ways they're worse. But, you know, overall it's a better society than we live in. And I look at it and I think people complain about immigration. I mean, who come up with the word immigrant? I mean, it sounds insulting, doesn't it? If someone from the UK goes to another country and settles over there, they don't call themselves immigrants, do they? They call themselves expats. So they've got a nice little label to put on themselves. But it's immigration. You're moving around. Migration is the most natural thing in the world. Animals have been doing it for since time began. They move to different climates and warmer climates. We've been doing it for centuries. People have moved from different places, moved around, but society's become so intolerable now. It's like we can't tolerate people. Well, actually we can. And if we look deeper than that, we are a tolerant country. We're a very accepting country. Look at the melting pot of people that live here. And we live in harmony, and there's not divisions between people. The divisions are coming via social media. It's a cultural, worldwide phenomena, not a UK phenomena. You think about the way people act on social media. We think it's Britain that's broken. It's not. It's a worldwide web. It's a bigger picture than that. It's not just the UK. You know, and we complain about immigration generally and people coming over on boats. They're coming here for a better life. They're coming here, they've gone for a journey. I mean, what people don't realise is an average year recently, 60 million people have been displaced across the world. 60 million! And we complain about the amount of people that turn up here. These people have been in war-torn countries, and we just magically assume they're just coming here because there's benefits. Well, that's not the case. They're not coming here just because there's benefits. They want to better themselves, and that where they've lived is so bad, they've taken that journey across the world to get here and risk their lives in the English Channel. You know, imagine someone risking their lives. Now, I'm not saying it's right, wrong or indifferent. I'm just saying, just look at it for what it is, which is these people are just looking for a safe place to live. You know, we will look after them. I was talking to a friend of mine. He was saying we was talking about us leaving the European Union and how it's increased wages, which is a good thing because it stopped the migration of people coming from Europe with cheap labour. And he said, well, with all these other immigrants coming in, it's not going to make any difference. And I said, it does, because these people are coming in. They haven't got jobs. They're settling here to be processed. And when they're processed, if they're ever going to stay here, they'll come into the system and then it will embrace them. And I just see this negativity about how bad Britain is. I love my country. And it's about time you looked at it from a different perspective. It's accepting, it's tolerant. You know, I believe in respect and consideration. These are the things that we were built on. This country was built on that. You know, we're not a country of avant-garde people. Yes, we've got a checkered history. I know that. It's not great. You know, when I was brought up at school, they gave us this rose-coloured spectacles to look at the world, and we were great. We were the Brits. We have got a checkered history. That's not a brilliant history, but we are where we are. But as a country, as a nation, we should be proud of our country. We should be proud that the people want to come here and settle here and do well here. You only have to look in London and the South East and the amount of people that have been integrated into the UK in the last 50 years alone. And people have done well, and they get on the housing ladder and they get good qualifications, and they honestly, it's far greater than you think it is. But just before you slag everyone off and jump on the bandwagon, just have a stop and think, okay, so what is our system? What is going on? It's very difficult to govern nowadays. It's a difficult job. I wouldn't want to be in government myself Because you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't. You know, if you think back to the pandemic years, when we first went into these lockdowns, everyone was complaining and moaning and groaning. We shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be doing that. Overreacting. Well, we only have to go back to history to have a look to see what happened when we didn't have them restrictions in place. We go back to 1918 with Spanish flu. 50 to 100 million people died during that time of the Spanish flu. Right, because we didn't have that lockdown. We had social distancing, but we didn't have lockdowns. I did this study when it first came out, the pandemic. I wanted to find out what had gone on or what to expect. And when I did the research, I realised that there were going to be variants of the virus. I couldn't even think what it was then. The virus. There was going to be variations. It mutates. It jumps from me, jumps to the next person. He learns from your DNA. And these are typical traits of a virus. And if we educated ourselves before we got these scientists telling us what was going on, you'd have seen that these things they were talking about, why they were putting these measures in place. But here's the thing, right? Regardless of Partygate, regardless of the cock-ups that people say are made in the United Kingdom during the pandemic years, I want you to think about this. We were one of the first countries out of lockdown. One of the first countries to get back to normal. Why was that? We developed a vaccine. We put everything in the kitchen sink at this vaccine. Because the government knew if we could vaccinate people, we could then stop the virus in its tracks. It's not going to stop the virus per se, but it's going to protect those who are less vulnerable, or more vulnerable, who are more likely to die from that virus. And we did that. We succeeded at that. Despite all the nonsense about PPE, about the nonsense about, whether this guy was right or that guy was right. Yeah, there were doctors in hospitals making decisions on whether to save that life or that life because I'm going to give that one a ventilator and not that one, because who's going to make that decision? Why does he make that decision? Think about it. So we look back at the pandemic years and say, yeah, they weren't great. They could have done things better, but there was no protocols for what do we do about a worldwide pandemic. Now that's happened. If it happens again in the modern era, I'm not talking about back in 1918 when things were very different, very localised. We didn't have an interconnected world like we've got today. If it happens today, it'd be another one. It would be different. We would deal with it differently. We would never experience that in our modern life. And I can understand why mistakes were made. It doesn't make it right, wrong, or indifferent. If you've lost a loved one during that period, my heart is with you. But how could it have been better? I don't know. We didn't. I remember having a conversation with someone saying, "Well, would you have wanted to be in government at that time? You imagine what that must have been like." To be in government saying we're going to lock everyone down, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And who was putting these protocols in place? People in government were working 24/7 to make sure that we had food on the table, to make sure that the NHS didn't get to the point. We even built the Nightingale hospitals just in case. That was a people say might have been waste of money, but it was there just in case we did have that nightmare scenario. Because if I hadn't have done it and we had have had that nightmare scenario, we would have said, well, you should have done this, you should have done that. Because there was no protocols in place for knowing what to do. And we find ourselves in a situation, we've got interest rates rising through the roof. Listen, we knew this was going to happen. We knew interest rates would have to rise one day. And I hear people saying it's the government's fault that interest rates have risen. It's the government's fault that we've got inflation. Well, not so fast. Not so fast. We came out of lockdown first. Other countries had locked their countries down. There were supply chain issues. People were sitting at home, wasn't spending their money. They weren't spending it on travel. They weren't spending it on the cinema, going out for dinner. They weren't spending it in the pub. They weren't spending it on holidays. They were saving money. according to the Bank of England, about £250 billion was accidentally saved during them lockdown periods and them pandemic years of social distancing. So we had all these people with all this money to spend. At the same time, goods and services were restricted because people weren't allowed to move around as they were. And because the supply chains, everyone was coming out of lockdowns in other countries as well. They had the same issues. People wanted to spend their money and they couldn't get the goods and services quick enough to people, which then puts prices or pressure on prices. And I'll give you an example. You know, if you've got goods for sale, a normal market, you've got plenty of inventory and you're selling your goods or services at X and you want to encourage more people to buy your stock or your service, you'd give a discount. So that keeps prices deflated. When you've got everyone that wants the service at the same time, you've got limited stock. You can't get more stock coming in, or you haven't got enough people to give your service across to, so you've got a restricted amount. Would you charge less for it? No, you wouldn't, right? You'd want the maximum you could for, and that causes the inflation. It was transitory for them sort of services. But then it got more ingrained as we had the second kick in, which was us leaving the European Union. When we leave the European Union, we haven't got the cheaper labour there, so our labour costs go up. We've got friction trade now, so it's not as easy coming through the channels where it used to come through, the goods and services from Europe. So therefore, prices went up because of that. And then on top of that, we had a war in Ukraine, which then put pressure on fuel prices and on energy prices generally. So that combination of the three things together wasn't the government's fault. They weren't responsible for the Ukraine. They weren't responsible for the pandemic. Maybe you could argue that the government was at fault for us leaving the European Union, for giving the vote to the general public, but the general public voted to leave, right? Was that the government's fault? You could argue. Yeah, well, they should have made it clearer. But the bottom line is we voted to leave. And that was a consequence for that. Higher prices on certain things. So these combinations, three things together, caused a problem. I hear people say, yeah, the government printed, or the Bank of England printed money, the quantitative easing causes inflation. If that was the case, in 2009, when they printed 432 billion pounds worth of sterling, how comes that didn't cause inflation back in 2009, 10, 11, 12? How comes it didn't cause core inflation? It might have caused inflated asset prices to a degree because you had cheap money, but it wasn't the quantitative easing that was causing the problem for inflation. So we printed 300 billion this time round to keep the economy going. That wasn't the core reason for inflation. So you can't blame the government. You can't blame, this was a worldwide phenomenon. We just had us leaving the European Union bolted onto that. We can't blame the government for that. We can't blame our country and say our country's shit, it's broken. You can't do that. Sorry. That's not their fault. He's got inflation down. Whether you think it's right or wrong or indifferent, he said I'd get inflation down, it's down. Right? You're going to start to see the downward trend for interest rates now. But let's get real, right? We had base rates at 0.01%. That was not sustainable for the long period. Interest rates were down for too long. If there was any finger pointing, it should have been the Bank of England maybe should have pushed it up a bit further. But because we'd voted to leave the European Union, everyone was worried that it would tip us into some sort of recession. And I can see why they made that decision. Don't think it was the right decision, and they should have. And I think if it hadn't been for the pandemic years, we would have seen interest rates slowly go up. And no one knew what was going to go on during them pandemic years. No one expected, well, I did. I'd expect a little boom because a lot of people put all their plans on hold on what to do between voting to leave the European Union and actually leaving in 2019. So I see all these people slagging off my country and I think, why are they doing this? This is a great place to live. A wonderful place to live. You don't get any aggravation. I hear people slagging off the NHS, the police service. Yes, there is a funding issue. I hear of councils going bankrupt. There is a certain amount of wastage. That needs to be addressed. And I'm sure it will be addressed. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, yeah, well, they'll probably get planning permission for that development site because someone will get a backhander. That's what people think of our people in charge. They're all at it. And that's not the case. I think there was a period in time that there was the case. Or there was more of that going on perhaps in the 70s and the 80s. But certainly not today. The world's too small for that. It's too risky for that. People get caught. It does go on. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure it goes on. I'm sure it does. But it's not to the degree that people think it is. We're all suspicious of everybody. You know, before you question someone, ask the question, is this true? Can you prove it? No, you can't. Well, keep your mouth shut then. If you can't prove it, keep your mouth shut. If you've got some proof, shout your mouth off. Yes. But until you can 100% prove it, maybe you should keep your opinion to yourself. And I hear it all the time. People saying, oh, this is the situation. I read it on the internet. Oh, for goodness sake, come on. Do you believe everything you read? Listen, when I do research, first thing I look for is what the source is. Because Google will serve you up whatever's on that, what it thinks is relative to you, right? So the first things that will come up is paid for stuff. Someone's paid to be at the top of Google, right at the top. It'll say sponsored, right? If you're looking at their wares, what they're describing, you know someone's paying for it or selling something somewhere. Is that impartial advice? Probably not, right? That's common sense, I'm afraid. You go down the page when you start searching and start to see the stuff that's not being advertised and pushed forward to you. To start getting the information and then ask yourself where it's come from. Where is that information? Who wrote it? It wasn't that long ago, right? If you was a journalist, you had to double check and fact check all the information you got out there. The problem with the modern society today is if you've got a story you don't get out there PDQ and you haven't got an exclusive on it, you've got to get a story out there or someone on the internet will do. So you see stories updated. You'll see a story on the news and it will say updated on. So they're continuously updating. They might get the information out there and have to correct it afterwards. It's a different world we live in today. If I get information, I'm looking for the source. I'm looking for whether it's credible. When it was written, who wrote it? I did all the research on viruses from the Harvard Medical Research Centre. I was on the Harvard Medical site. Now, would you say that was a good site to look at? I was pretty sure that is, right? It's not going to be Barry from Bushy on Facebook telling me that this is what he reckons. These are facts, or they're certainly information that's been fact checked, or we know it's coming from a good source. So before you shout your mouth off about information you get from the internet, double check where it's come from. Because I see people being absolutely crucified for no reason because someone's got an opinion of something. And that is not a Britain's issue, that is a worldwide issue. You know, I look at Prince Harry, for example, and Meghan Markle. People are saying they're polarising people. But I just look at it, I don't really give a monkeys whether he's loyal to his family or he's not to his family. I mean, his family have caused a lot of aggro in the past. I mean, some of his family have done land grabs, right? Some of his family have traded slaves. So we can't say the royal family's wonderfully, there's no skeletons in the cupboard, because there is, right? But you imagine, right, that fella was 11 years old and he was standing behind his mum's coffin and then he had to go and smile at people and greet them. Imagine what that was like, right? So give him a break, right? If he's got a problem with his family, he's served in Afghanistan, wherever he served, he's done his bit for the country. If he's got a problem with his old man, good luck to him. I ain't got a problem with that. If you've got a problem with your parents. Maybe you shouldn't do your dirty washing and laundry, but let's get something straight. He was selling something, wasn't he, at the time? He's kept quiet since his book come out. So he was selling something. Just accept that's the way he is. So what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't make him a bad person. It doesn't make him a good person. And his wife, everyone says, he's this, she's this, she's this. Really? Really? Come on. I don't really give a monkeys, but just leave them alone. Leave them alone. They've got their things to sell. If people want to buy it, they buy it. Keep your opinions to yourself because you don't know that woman. You've never met her. And you've only got a journalist view of something. Someone might come out and woodwork and say, oh, she did this, she did this, she did this. Look, have you ever got something wrong before about someone? Realise that what you thought about them wasn't true? So there's plenty of stories out there of people being slated for something to come up. Look at Cliff Richard, right? I'm not Cliff Richard's biggest fan, right? I don't really like his music, but he's a nice enough fella, I'm sure he is, right? And they slagged him off because there was a question mark over some sexual abuse from years ago. And they stalked him and they ruined his life. Ruined his life without any evidence whatsoever. Someone can say something about someone and then they get absolutely crucified for it. And we're too quick to judge. Far too quick to judge. And I think it's about time we were more tolerant and more considerate about before we shout our mouths off. Now I'm moaning, I'm shouting my mouth off, but I'm just giving you a generalised view of what's going on. It's a country I love. Leave it alone. It's wonderful. We've got wonderful weather. We might have a hot summer now and again and a wet winter now and again, but we've got a very moderate climate. We've got a green and pleasant land. We've got some wonderful places, wonderful parks to walk around. It's safe. We've got street lighting. We've got taxation. People have got a good standard of living. Yes, there has been a cost of living crisis, but we are looking after people. We're giving them a subsidy on their energy bills, and we are supporting people. Maybe we could do more. I'm sure we could. But if you do know someone's suffering, then help them out. But stop shouting your mouth off, telling me my country's broken when it's not. It's not perfect. I'm sure it'll never be perfect. And the way things are going with social media and the world nowadays, everyone's jumping on the bandwagon and telling me how this bad person's bad. Everyone's got an opinion. But I wouldn't like to be in government today running the country. I wouldn't like to be in the Bank of England making decisions on people's lives. But we've got to have a fine balance. And overall, I don't think they're doing that bad a job. They could do better, yes. They're not doing that bad a job. We haven't got riots in the streets. And we haven't got major, massive disasters in this country. And, if you've got a problem, if it's that bad, go and find somewhere else to live. Go and live on a boat in the middle of the ocean for all I care. Go and find out and see how, great it is then. You start complaining about taxes, Everyone stop paying their taxes tomorrow. There'll be riots in the street. We don't realise how stable our country is. There are countries out there where they've got dictators. I mean, I've heard some horrendous names that politicians have been called in the last few years. Calling them dictators. And you want a dictator? Dictatorship? Wow. Idi Amin comes to mind. Saddam Hussein comes to mind. Where you couldn't do the things you want. We've got a free country. We've got a free voice. I have people say I can't say anything about COVID. There was a lot of misinformation about COVID. And I can understand why they said, look, we don't want this misinformation out there. We want to protect people. And then they're questioning the government's methods of why they're saying, no, this is not, you can't put this out. You can't put this out. We have got a freedom of speech. You can say what you want. You have got a freedom. Far more freedom than you ever thought possible. The fact that we can post on social media and the opportunities available to us today are far greater than they were 50 years ago. As a young man 50 years ago, young kids, in my early teens, there was 3 million people unemployed when I first left school at 17. 7 years ago. There was 3 million people unemployed. It was tough to get a job. Today you could start a business from your bedroom. Honestly. You see people, youngsters, turning into influencers just by utilising modern technology. You could do affiliate marketing on Amazon or eBay. You could start, honestly. It's amazing the amount of opportunities that people have nowadays. Far greater than we had. Modern technology is going in a direction that there will be as many job losses as there will be job creations. And I look back at the last 50 years of when I was understanding the economy and understanding what was going on and think, wow, we've come a long way. We've come a long way. And we're at that point where there's big social and economic change coming. And we've got to embrace that. We embrace it as a country, together, united, not divided. Appreciate that everyone's got their opinion. Accept their opinion is there. You might be screaming at me saying, well, you've got an opinion about my country. I'm not saying you're right, wrong or indifferent. I'm just saying don't say it's broken. Just look at the facts. The facts are you're living comfortably. You're not under threat. You might feel under threat on the internet with some trolls out there, but we're living in a time where we are at peace in this country. But yes, I know it's not perfect. And I ask you just to be considerate and respectful. God bless you. I love my country.